Hey everyone, welcome to this course. In this first lesson, we're going to talk about what n8n actually is and why it's become one of the most flexible automation tools out there, and also how it compares to others you may already know like Zapier, Make, or even Airflow. By the end of this video, you'd have a clear understanding of where n8n fits in the automation landscape and when to choose it for your own projects or your own business workflows. Let's get started. So first, what is n8n? N8n is pronounced N8N and it stands for Node Nation, and it's a workflow automation platform, meaning it connects different apps and services together so that you can automate repetitive tasks and move data between systems without writing full code. But here's what makes n8n special. It's open source, meaning that you can self-host it, it's developer friendly, which also gives you far more control and flexibility than typical no-code tools out there. And you can think of it as the bridge between no-code simplicity and full code power. So if you've been using Zapier or Airflow and they had a baby, it would probably look like n8n because it's a good bridge between the two. At its core, n8n uses nodes and each node can perform an action. So for example, one node can fetch emails from Gmail. You can have another node that can analyze text using OpenAI, and then you can have another that can send results to Slack, Google Sheets, or databases. And it's so easy to use that you can simply drag these nodes into a workflow, connect them visually, and then n8n will handle all the logic, data passing, and triggers behind the scene. The best part about all this is that it's not limited by pricing tiers or any app restrictions. You can even build custom nodes or even integrate APIs that don't exist yet. Now, let me position n8n against some of the other popular automation tools out there. And I'm going to start with Zapier, right? So Zapier is amazing for beginners. It's very easy to use, it's cloud-based, and it's quick to set up. But its workflows are often linear. And what I mean is that they run one step after the other, and it's harder to branch or handle complex logic with that. Also, from a pricing perspective, pricing scales really quickly as your automation grows. In contrast, n8n allows for branching, looping, conditional logic, and complex data manipulation without the same restrictions. Now, let's compare n8n to Make. So, Make offers a visual that's also a flexible experience as well. It's more advanced than Zapier and also supports some data transformation really well. But it's still a closed platform because you are limited to what Make supports and your data flows through their servers as well. But n8n, on the other hand, it gives you data ownership, meaning that you can run it on your own machine, on a private server, or even inside your own company's infrastructure, which is really a big deal for security conscious teams that require data sovereignty to some extent. Now, let me compare n8n to Apache Airflow. So Airflow, it sits at the other extreme end. It's a developer-first orchestration platform built for large-scale data pipelines, and it's incredibly powerful, but it's also complex. It requires that you know Python, and it's not really designed for everyday business automation. Now, n8n sits right in the middle. So you get the powerful logic, you get the control just like Airflow, but with the visual simplicity and the speed of tools like Zapier and Make. That's why you'd often see n8n being used by startups or data teams and developers who need serious automation without having to spin up a data engineering stack. Now, we are in the era where AI, APIs, and cloud apps are everywhere. Most of these things don't talk to each other natively. So the good thing is that n8n helps you connect them your way. It's a flexible layer that can integrate with hundreds of tools or even your own APIs to build automations that feel tailor-made for your workflow. So whether you are automating marketing campaigns, or you are processing form submissions, or you are building internal tools or creating AI agents, n8n can act as the orchestrator that holds it all together for you. In short, what I really want to say is that if you are using Zapier, then it's best for quick, simple automations. Make is great for visual cloud-based workflows. Airflow is for the heavy data pipelines, and n8n, it gives you the developer-grade control with no code accessibility, all while keeping your data in your own hands. Now, in the next lesson, we'll go hands-on inside n8n, would explore the interface, how the nodes work, and how to create your very first workflow. Let's jump in. Hey everyone, welcome back. Now that you have a sense of what n8n is and how it compares to tools like Zapier, Make, or Airflow, let's talk about what you can actually do with it. Because once you understand the possibilities, that's when things really start to click. In this lesson, we are going to go over 4 major use cases for n8n. The first major use case is automation, the second one is APIs, the third one is AI workflows, and then finally we'll talk a bit about AI agents. And along the way, I would also show you a few real-world examples I've personally built so that you can start imagining what's possible for your own projects. Let's start with the most common use case, automation. So think of all the manual tasks you do every day, moving data between tools, sending emails or reminders, copying responses from one app to the other. With n8n, you can automate all of that. For example, I built automations that automatically summarize emails and send them back to my inbox using GPT-4. I've also built automations that create and assign tasks in Notion when a new lead comes in. I've even built automations that post content automatically to social media using scheduled triggers. And then finally, I have built this automation that also alerts me in Slack when specific keywords appear in a database or a document. Now, these are small, repeatable workflows, but to be honest, they do add up to hours saved every single week. So that's what makes n8n really powerful. You can connect nearly any services and let a system handle the repetitive work for you. Now, let's talk about the second common use case for n8n, which is APIs, integrations and custom connections. This is the second big use case for n8n. If you've ever wished two tools could talk to each other, then know that n8n can make this thing happen because it has built-in nodes for hundreds of popular services, but you can also connect any API using the HTTP request node. So for example, I've used n8n to connect Gemini and OpenAI APIs to process user inputs and generate text. I've also used n8n to integrate Twilio and WhatsApp to build chat-based assistants, used n8n to pull data from Google Sheets and push it to a custom dashboard or app, and even interact with AWS, Notion, or Slack APIs to sync data across systems. So essentially, n8n acts as a universal adapter. If a platform has an API, then you can plug it right in. And since you can host n8n yourself, you don't have to worry about exposing sensitive keys or sending data through third-party servers. Now let's talk about AI workflows. This is where automation meets intelligence, and this is where things get really exciting. n8n makes it easy to build flows that combine automation with reasoning. So for example, I've built workflows in the past that would typically just take a user's message, run it through GPT or Gemini, and return a summarized or rewritten version. I've also built AI workflows that can analyze uploaded files and extract insights automatically. I built AI workflows that generate personalized email drafts or content based on structured data, and even use embeddings and vector database for retrieval augmented generation, which is RAG. These are the kinds of workflows that turn static data into smart dynamic systems. You're not just automating actions here, you're automating thinking. And the best part is that you can start simple, using one AI node at a time, and then eventually expand your workflows to grow. Now let's talk about the final use case, which is AI agent. Think of an AI agent as a workflow that can make decisions, perform actions, and interact with users all on its own. So for instance, I built several voice and chat agents powered by n8n. An example is a compliance bot voice agent that answers security questions and checks policy requirements, or an AI nutrition planner that builds meal plans through WhatsApp using Twilio and OpenAI, or a WhatsApp AI assistant that extracts user goals and returns structured responses like 3-day or 7-day meal plans. I've also built a brand voice AI agent that helps founders or content creators generate posts aligned with their tone. These aren't just automations, they are interactive assistants. They can listen, they can process, they can decide, and they can respond, all orchestrated inside n8n. This is the power of combining AI models, APIs, and automation all on one platform. So now I know I've been talking a lot, but let's recap. You can use n8n to automate repetitive workflows. You can use n8n to connect APIs and move data between platforms. You can use n8n to build AI-powered processes that think and respond. And finally, you can even create full AI agents that acts on your behalf. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to dive into the n8n interface, and I'll walk you through the editor, explain how nodes work, and show you how you can build your very first AI workflow from scratch. See you there. Hey everyone, welcome back. Now that we've covered what n8n is and what you can build with it, it's time to get hands-on. So in this lesson, I'm going to walk you through the n8n interface so that you can understand exactly how to navigate it, what each section does, and how all the core pieces, the nodes, the workflows, the triggers, and executions fit together. By the end of this lesson, you'll feel completely comfortable inside the n8n editor and you'll be ready to start building your first AI automation. Let's get started. So when you first log in into n8n, you'd land on the dashboard. So this is your home base and this is where all your workflows live. So as you can see, we have the workflow tab and we also have the credentials. Now for the workflows, you'd realize that you'd see the name of the workflows, you see the status, whether it's active or it's inactive, and when they were last executed. So it does show us like the last updated time. And if you come under the executions tab, you'd see the last executed workflows, especially the ones that are in production as well. And then from here, you can simply click on new workflow. By clicking on new workflow, you get the ability to start afresh, or if you don't want to start afresh and you want to edit an existing workflow, you can simply click on the existing workflow and you can do that. Now, at the top in here, when I come in here as well, you see other important information like if you've had any failed production executions in the last 7 days, you get to see the failure rate, the time you saved, and the runtime average. You also see things like executions, which I've already talked about. You see things like variable. You see things like the data table as well, which is all great. Now, let's click on workflows again and let's click on create workflow so that we can step inside the editor itself, because this is where all the magic happens. The workflow editor is sort of like a visual canvas where you build your automations by connecting blocks or what I call the nodes. And at the top of the toolbar, you would see the ability to change the workflow name. You'd also have the ability to sort of either like share your workflow, set it as active, or you also have the ability to save the workflow as well. Now, when you come to the right-hand side here, this is really where you see your nodes. So if you click on the plus button, you can decide what sort of nodes you want. Now, if you're starting at first, you first want to make sure that you're adding a trigger. But for this lesson, we just want to focus on the interface. So we are not going to be adding any trigger in here. But really what you see here is the nodes. And also when you click on this, you have the ability to sort of like search within this canvas. You also have the ability to like open a node. In here, you can really add in like a sticky note. So if you're building something and you want to include comments or notes, then this is exactly what you need to do. You just have to click on the sticky notes and then you have the ability to do so. The good thing about the sticky notes is that you can color code them. If you want to be a lot more granular and modular, then it's very good to like color code them as well. Now, this gives you the ability to like zoom the workflow whatever way you want it to. So if you want to like, for instance, zoom in, all you have to do is click on this icon. If you want to zoom out, you click on this icon. If you want to like reset the zoom, you can click on this icon. And if you want to like sort of tidy up things, you can also click on this icon as well. Now, the other important things here as well is self-hosting. So if you're self-hosting, this is where you get to know that you actually need to go in. It would usually tell you the number of versions you are behind. So what you just have to do is you click on this bell here. If you realize that you are versions behind, then this is a good indication for you to upgrade your self-hosted instance as well. Now, if you click on this really gives you the ability to like get more information about n8n. So if you want to take a course, you want some documentation, there's a lot of like quick start guides here as well, which is really good. Now in here is where you get a template. Okay, so for instance, if you are just starting out with n8n and you want to have some templates to start with, then all you have to do is click on the templates here and you have the ability to see a lot of templates in here, which is really good. Now most of these templates are free, but then if you go through all these 6,000 or so templates, you realize that some of them are paid and some of them are free, but then they do have a lot of free templates at least to get started with. So at this point, I'm going to walk you through like the core nodes here. So when I click on the plus button, you can see that there are different categories in which you can trigger your workflow. So for instance, you can trigger your workflow manually. And if you want to trigger your workflow manually, you just click on the manual trigger here, or you can trigger based on an action in an app. Okay. And there are a lot of apps that you can trigger your workflow from. So you can trigger from Airtable, you can trigger from Telegram, you can trigger from Asana, you can trigger from AWS. AWS. So there's so many different ways in which you can sort of like trigger your workflows, especially if you want to trigger your workflow from an application. And this makes it a lot more easier as well. Now let's talk about like on schedule. So if you want to sort of have a workflow that runs at a specific schedule, then this is what you would have to use. You can trigger your workflow on schedule as well. Or let's say you have a form on your website and you want to trigger your workflow from that website as well, then you would want to be using, let's say, a webhook call. And so this node here would help you trigger your workflow from the webhook as well. Now let's move on to on-form submission. So this is a form which sits within n8n. So if you wanted to trigger your workflow from a form that is being generated from n8n itself, then you can use this on-form submission trigger as well to trigger your workflow. Now, if you want to trigger your workflow when another workflow executes, then you can really use this one as well. You can use this trigger, and this trigger here would run the flow when called by the execute workflow node from a different workflow. This is when things start getting a lot more complex and complicated when you want to be calling a workflow from another different workflow. Just think of it like calling a function from a different function or from a different code, entire program or code that you write. Now, you can also trigger a workflow from a message you send inside n8n itself. So for instance, if you want to have like a conversation and you want that to trigger a workflow, then you can really trigger this workflow from that. So if I click on open chats, for instance, and you had like additional nodes connected to this node here, then just by sending in a chat would automatically trigger the workflow as well. Now let's look at the last way to trigger a workflow. If you want to trigger from like multiple triggers as well, this is something you can do. And again, like I said, this means that you are going into the complexities of like building AI agents or AI automations or even automations in general in n8n. So now that we've looked at the various triggers, another thing I want us to look at is executions. Okay, so anytime your workflow runs, one of the most important parts of using n8n effectively is like by running executions. Okay, so the good thing is that you can view like past executions when it's run, whether it succeeded, whether it failed, or how long it took. This makes it incredibly easy to debug and optimize your workflows as well, because sometimes things may fail. So once you open on executions, you'll be able to see the error and you can rerun it from any step where it failed. So executions basically gives you some sort of like audit trail so that you know exactly what happened at the back end. So here's how everything fits together. Okay, so just think of nodes as like your building blocks. They define the actions, and also think of triggers as what starts your workflow, and then think of workflows in general as like the connection of nodes together to perform a complete automation. And another thing you should also not forget is executions, because they show you the history of how those workflows run, and together they can form the full automation lifecycle inside n8n, from the setup time to the running to analyzing results. Before we wrap up, here are a few quick tips for when you start experimenting. Always test nodes individually before connecting them all together. So like I mentioned, you can use the execute node button often because it helps isolate issues. Also keep your credentials organized because you reuse them across multiple workflows, and also give each node a clear name like send Slack message or summarize emails so that your workflow is easy to understand. And as we progress in this course and we start building more sophisticated workflows, you understand what I mean. So yeah, that's a quick tour of the n8n interface, from the dashboard to the workflow editor to the triggers, the nodes, and execution. And in the next lesson, we'll build your first real workflow step by step so that you can see how all these pieces come together in action. So see you in the next video. Hey everyone, in this lesson, we are going to dig into a really important decision. Should you self-host n8n or should you go with a paid cloud version of n8n? Now, let's talk about it. There's significant trade-offs in cost, control, scalability, maintenance, and features. So I want you to make the right decision here, and I want you to know what the right choice is for your own personal use case. By the end of this lesson, you should be clear on what you gain and what you risk when you self-host, and when the cloud version might be the better pick for you. Now, let's start with why you would even consider self-hosting in the first place. I want to touch first on the upside of self-hosting n8n, and then I'll talk about the downside. So the upside is full control. So you get to manage your infrastructure, your data, your credentials, and many Reddit users highlight this as a major benefit for them. The other thing has to do with cost savings. So you don't pay per workflow or per step in the same way the cloud plan might. some people say they are able to cut their automation costs by 77% by switching from n8n cloud to self-hosting. Now, the other benefit is the ability to use custom nodes, extensions, deeper customization that might be restricted in the cloud due to the fact that it's a managed environment. Okay. Now, the other benefit of self-hosting is like data privacy compliance. So if you have a strict requirement, then self-hosting makes a lot more sense because you get to decide where the data lives, how backups are configured, etc. Now, let's talk about the hidden costs and limitations of self-hosting. So when you self-host, it's not just a plug-in and forget. There are some limitations, so let's talk about it. Now, the first one has to do with technical overhead. You must manage your own server, backups, updates, security patches, scaling. In fact, the official documents say that self-hosted n8n requires technical knowledge and mistakes can lead to data loss, security issues, and downtimes. And when you saw in my own instance, you could see that you have to make sure that you are not behind in terms of versions as well. Now, the other thing has to do with OAuth integration friction. So for some services like Google Sheets, you need to set up OAuth credentials manually. If you don't know how to do that really well, then you may definitely not enjoy the process of self-hosting. Another downside is support and team features, right? Now, the free self-hosted community version, it lacks some enterprise or team collaboration features. And for some teams, the cloud offer will make it just easier to manage all this infrastructure that you'd miss with self-hosting. And also, as your workflows grow and become mission critical, you need to consider architecture like queue mode, the workers, failover monitoring, and the cloud version will often handle that for you. So as you scale your business, this might be like a big win for you as well. Now, think about the unexpected infrastructure costs. So while the software might be free, hosting it itself won't be free. And sometimes usage patterns can sort of like spike your entire cost as well, like your API calls and all that. All those things can increase your deployment costs. And not like when you are cloud hosting, you don't do that. Now, this is when cloud hosting makes sense. So when would I recommend going with a cloud version? So if you are just starting and want minimal setup time to value, then for instance, you want to prototype automations quickly without managing servers, then you are good to go with the cloud version. Okay. Personally recommend that if you are new to n8n, you don't have any DevOps knowledge, then don't worry yourself with self-hosting at all. The other thing as well is if your workflows are business critical, or you are in a team and you want robust support, or you have like managed scaling, reliability requirements, then you need to cloud host, because if you don't want to maintain that yourself, then you have to do that. Also, if you prefer predictable pricing, you don't want to deal with prices and infrastructure costs or tricky setups, then you should consider the cloud version as well. If you need features that the self-hosted community edition may lack, for instance, collaboration, multi-user templates, enterprise capabilities, then go the cloud version as well. Now, this is how to mitigate self-hosting risk. If you choose self-hosting, then here are the best practices to avoid some common pitfalls. So first, use a reliable VPS or cloud provider with good cost performance. So think somewhere $5 to $10 a month for an instance of like EC2. Also automate your backups and your database instantly, and use version control in your deployments so that your updates are safe as well. Another thing is monitor workflow executions, your resource usage, and plan for scaling. That is adding workers using queue mode before you hit your limits. And if you are using like sensitive OAuth integrations like Google, then follow n8n's documentation and configure your credentials properly to avoid sudden failures as well. Now, you can also document your infrastructure setup so that if you change teams or someone new joins your team, then they can understand and know how to maintain it as well for you. This is what someone said on Reddit. Sharing workflows and credentials is restricted in the self-hosted version. So if someone leaves, nobody else would have access as well. All right, I know I've talked a lot, but let me just summarize what I just said. Self-hosting, it gives you maximum control and potentially lower cost if you are comfortable with the technical side and willing to maintain the infrastructure. Now, the cloud hosted n8n version, it gives you ease of use, supports managed infrastructure, and faster time to value. But the trade-off is some control. And as you scale, you might pay more or hit your workflow feature and limits. And for some people, this is fine. So I'll say that the right choice, it really depends on you, your team, your budget, your risk tolerance, volume of workflows, your compliance needs, and how critical uptime or scaling is for you. I do have an attachment on how you can sort of like self-host. I'm not going to be covering self-hosting your n8n instance in this course, but I do have an attachment that has documented the steps for you, because that is more of like a DevOps procedure as opposed to like building AI automation. And I want us to get quickly into the fun stuff. So I'm going to attach all these documentation on how to self-host. if that is what you decide to do in the exercise files so that you can try it out. Maybe this could be like your weekend DevOps project as well. See you in the next module of the course. So up until now, we've talked about what n8n is, what you can build with n8n, how it compares to Zapier, Make, and other AI automation tools. I've also walked you through the n8n interface and the different types of nodes available. Now, in this lesson, we're going to be building your first AI automation. So come with me into n8n and let's get started. Our first AI automation is a motivational quote generator. And as you can see on the screen, I do have a schedule trigger. I do have it connected to a Gemini chat model. I have a simple memory, and then I have a Gmail node. So what this motivational code generator does is that it sends daily motivational messages straight into my inbox. So I'm going to show you exactly how I built it. I'm going to explain the logic along the way and explain what every node does so that if you are trying this out at home, you know exactly what to do. Let's go back home and let's click on Create Workflow. Once you click on Create Workflow, it brings you to this empty canvas you have in here. Remember, for every AI automation you build, the first step should always be a trigger. And we talked about the various types of nodes available. So if you click on Add First Step in here, you'd see that there are multiple ways in which you can trigger your workflow or your automation. Since we want this to run on a schedule, you're going to select the On Schedule trigger. Now, in here, you can decide what time you want to set the schedule to and how many times in a day you want this thing to run. So for instance, if I wanted to run every day at midnight, that is the exact rule I'm going to put in here. And now the next step here is to add our AI agents node. So I'm adding the AI agents node because the AI agents node will be responsible for generating the messages for me. I'm not going to be putting in the messages manually. So I will need the help of the AI agents node to generate the messages for me. So this is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on the plus button here. Once I click on the plus button here, what I'm interested in is AI. I'm going to select AI. And in here, I'm just going to select the AI agents node. Now, because I am not using a chat trigger and I am using a schedule trigger, I'm not really interested in the information coming through from the chat trigger. What you see here is the source for prompt user message. And this is really the type of prompt message you'd put inside ChatGPT. So I'm going to click on this and then I'm going to click on define below. Now in here, what I want to do is just really define what my prompt user message would be. How do I want my agent to be prompted every single day? Since what I'm interested in is the agent generating motivational messages every single day, this is exactly what I'm going to put in the prompt user message. I'm just going to say generate a motivational quote for today. Okay, that's exactly what I'm going to use in my prompt user message. Again, think of your prompt user message as the message you enter into ChatGPT anytime you are trying to prompt it. That's really what your prompt user message is. And it can be as detailed as possible, or it can just be a single line, right? So once you have that inside there, the next step for you is to decide whether you want the output to be in a specific format. This is our first AI automation, so we don't really need to specify a specific format, okay? Now you can also enable a fallback model as well. That is, if the main model fails, which other model should it use? Because when you're building AI automations, I mean, the main reason why people would build automations is to ensure that they are saving time, right? So you want to make sure that your automation is as reliable as possible, which is why you would have like a fallback model. Now, under options, you can decide to add so many options to this AI agent node. But what is very important is you add a system message. Now, if you are familiar with using ChatGPT, then your system message would really be what you would put in the project you create in ChatGPT as the instructions. So that's really what your system message is. So if you typically use ChatGPT and you use the projects feature and you typically add instructions, then that's exactly what you'll be putting inside your system message, okay? So inside my system message, you can also go down and define exactly what this AI agent is or exactly what you want the model to do for you. One good way of defining your system message is to describe the role and also give the behavior. You can define things like the tone. You can define things like words that should never be said in your motivational quotes. You can really decide on how the structure should be like. For the purposes of this video, I just want to keep it very simple. I'll just give some few instructions, okay? The exact system message I'm going for is write a short motivational message to inspire someone's morning. Make it sound friendly, human, and personal, and keep it under 200 characters and avoid quotes from famous people. I probably don't want to get a copyright strike, or I don't want to get sued by using people's quotes. So I'm sort of like defining all that in here. And I know I just have like 3 lines in the instructions box here, but typically you could have so many lines. Mind you, what you give to your AI is what you get back, okay? So this is what I have here as my system message. I know that this video is focused on generating motivational messages. If you own a business and you want to send, let's say, daily financial tips to your customers, you can use this automation for that. If you want to send daily wellness tips to your customers, you can use this AI automation for that as well. So this is great. You connect your front end to this as a back end, and every day people just get messages as well. It really depends on how far or how well you want to improve upon this AI automation in here. So now that we have our system message and our prompt user message set up, the next step is to add a chat model. So you need to really decide what model you want to use. So in my case, I want to use Google Gemini's chat model. So I'm going to come into Google Gemini and I'm going to click on the chat model here. Now, Google just released Gemini 3.0, so you can decide to use that. I'm just using the default model set here, which is 2.5. Okay, before you are able to use Google Gemini's chat model, you need to have API keys. You need to make sure that your credentials are set up. And in order to do so, you need to go into the Google Cloud Console and create API keys. And I'm going to show you exactly how you do that. So come with me into the Google Cloud Console. In order to access the Google Cloud Console, you need to go to console.cloud.google.com. And once you go there, it'll bring you to this home page. What you're interested in is first creating a project. So you just have to click on this icon and you click on new projects. Once you click on create projects, you give it a name. And now once you are inside your project, and then you click on APIs and services. Inside APIs and services, what you want to do first is enable APIs and services. So in here, you want to search for the Google services you want to use. So in this case, I'm going to search for Gemini Cloud Assist or Gemini for Google Cloud. And then I'm going to click on this and I'm going to enable it, okay? So once you have this enabled, because we want to eventually send this to an email address, we also want to make sure that we have Gmail enabled. So you have to search for Gmail as well and enable that API. So you click on Gmail and then you enable the API. Okay, once you have your APIs enabled, the next step is to come back into APIs and services, click on credentials, and then you click on create credentials and you select API key. And then once you select API key, you'll be able to provide information in here. If this is your first time doing this, you probably would also have to sign up first to Google Cloud Console and answer a few questions before you be able to get onto the screen. Now, I must say that if you are self-hosting, you would definitely have to go through this process. But if you are cloud hosting n8n, all this form of authentication will be handled for you automatically since you are in the cloud version and everything is handled for you. So like I always say that if this is your first time trying out n8n, you're not technical at all, I'll just recommend that you just go with a cloud version because that's a lot more easier and very easy to set up and manage as well. So let's come back into our automation here with the assumption that you have your API key created already, and click on create new credentials and then put in your API key. So once you have your API key set up, you should be good to go. So I'm going to come back in here, and then after you have your chat model connected, the next thing you're interested in adding here is your memory. So I'm going to click on memory, and you can just use a simple memory. If there are other types of memory here as well, so if you want to use, let's say, MongoDB chat memory or PostgreSQL Redis, it really depends on what type of memory you want to go for. So I'm going with a simple memory, and then in here, what you're really interested in is to get a key for this. In order to get a key for this, all you want to do is just execute the previous node, and we'll probably just drag the key from the workflow ID. If you are doing this in production, you probably want to have a better way of creating keys that are unique so that your automation can remember anytime it runs. Because you having a key in memory would help your AI automation remember and keep some form of history so that you can always map an output to a particular run. Okay, so I'm going to open my AI agents node now. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on execute step. Now, as you can see, our output has been generated for us and we have a motivational message that has been generated for us. Now, the next step is to connect our Gmail node. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to click on Gmail. Again, back to my point on whether you're self-hosting or cloud hosting. If you are cloud hosting, then you're able to connect to Gmail by doing the authentication all inside n8n. But if you are self-hosting, then you have to go back into the Google Cloud console and create a client secret and a client ID, because you need a client secret and a client ID to authenticate into Gmail. So what we are interested in terms of the actions is the send a message action, okay? So that is exactly what we are going to do. So let's assume you have your credentials set up now in Google Cloud Console. If you want to do that again, like I said, you come into Google Cloud Console. This time around, instead of creating an API key, what you're interested in is OAuth client ID. So this is what you're really interested in, the OAuth client ID. And inside here, if you are self-hosting, all you have to do is create new credentials and then you'll be able to enter the client ID and then the client secret as well. Okay, so let's go back. Assuming you have your credentials connected to Gmail and your resource and everything will just stay the way they are, now you have to enter a to email. So in this case, I'm probably going to be entering this email address and then I'm just going to give it a subject. So the subject is really what you would use anytime you are creating an email. And for the message, what you just have to do is drag the output in here. And that should be it, okay? So if I should run this automation right now, it tells me that the automation has been sent. So if I should go into my Gmail account, I should see this automation already in my Gmail. So this is the motivational message we got as an output from our AI automation. Okay guys, this concludes this particular lesson. I'll encourage you to try other output types as well. Instead of sending an email, you can decide to send a voice note, you can decide to send a video instead. So I would encourage you to try it out as well on your own and see which other use cases you can build on top of this AI automation. Alright, now that we understand what n8n is and what it can do, let's move into the core building blocks of n8n. These are the fundamental nodes that you would use in almost every workflow, and these are categorized into the trigger nodes, the action nodes, and a bit of data handling. By the end of this model, you'll be able to build your first working automation that captures data from an external tool and logs it into Google Sheets. Let's get right into it. In the previous lesson, I did talk about the various ways in which you can trigger, right? So let's look at the trigger nodes we have in here. I had talked about the fact that you can trigger manually, you can trigger on app events, you can trigger on a schedule, you can use a webhook call, you can trigger on form submission, on a chat message, and so many other ways. Let's focus first on the webhook trigger, because if you are connecting your tool or if you are trying to receive data from a different application, most likely you'll be using the webhook trigger, because the webhook trigger sort of listens for incoming data. So for example, when someone completes a purchase or if someone submits a form that isn't really linked to your Google Sheets and you connect the form information with a webhook trigger in here, you'll be able to capture information from that tool so that it gets populated into another tool you have within your automation. So you can basically copy the webhook URL, paste it in your form tool, and then instantly receive data from n8n. And you can also transfer data from that tool into n8n as well. One pro tip is that always test your webhook using the test webhook button. And this is basically what you do. You just click on listen for test event and you'll be able to see what data comes in as well. In the last chapter of this model, I'm going to demonstrate how you can do this as well. Now, the other trigger we want to focus on is the schedule trigger. Okay, so the schedule trigger is also called the cron trigger. Okay, this one runs on a schedule. So it could be hourly, it could be seconds, it could be minutes, it could be weeks. It's perfect for automated reports or if you have any routine tasks that you need to run. And then an example would be if you have to send a daily Slack message at a specific time, let's say 9 a.m., with sales summary or meeting summary, then you're most likely going to be using the cron trigger. Now, the other trigger mode I want to talk about is the app trigger. So this would basically run if you want to trigger the flow when something happens in an external app like Telegram or Airtable. So this is slightly different from the webhook node we just looked at. So the good thing is that n8n comes with a lot of pre-built app triggers. So for example, when a new role is added to Google Sheets, you can really use like the Google Sheets trigger, and you can see that it has different actions that you can sort of like trigger on. You can trigger on when a new role has been added, like I said, or a role has been updated. So when a new role is added in Google Sheets, or if you want to use like an email as a trigger, then if the email provider you're using is Gmail, then you can set Gmail as your trigger so that it triggers the workflow when a message is received. So these really remove the need to poll or check manually in those apps when the message is received or when an action happens. n8n will basically do the listening for you. So I just want to say that the triggers, they are all about when something happens. So once you make a decision in your own processes, in your own automation about when something happens, then you can use any of these trigger modes we have, or trigger categories or classes we have within n8n to trigger your workflow or to start your workflow. n8n will just take care of the rest. So all you have to decide is when something happens, and n8n would handle everything. Once your workflow is triggered, the next step is what should it do? So these are the action nodes. Let's go back into our n8n editor and let's walk through what these action nodes are. Click on create workflow. Let's just assume we already have a manual trigger in here. So like I said, we've already decided when something happens, which is like start this workflow when I trigger it manually, and we just want to decide on what should happen afterwards. So when it comes to the action nodes, there's a lot of action nodes. They've been categorized into different categories. You can have like the AI agents node, you can have action in apps, you can have data transformation, you can have flow, you can have human in the loop, which is basically to like wait for human approval before you continue something. So let's start first with the HTTP request node. So this node is key to the internet, okay? n8n is all about connecting APIs. So if you want to connect APIs and n8n does not have a dedicated node for it, then you can use the HTTP request node, and it makes the integration a lot more seamless. So you can send like a GET request, or you can send a POST request, and you can connect to almost every tool. Know that some tools would have, let's say you want to build something with Google Gemini, you would already have like a Gemini node in n8n. But if you want to create an automation that connects to a tool that n8n does not have a dedicated node for, then you can be assured that you can just use the HTTP request node, and would help you a lot as well. Now, the other thing is that, like I said, you can use the HTTP request node, and it would help you get all the information and the data you need as well. Now let's talk about the function node. So the function node is also called a code node. And what it does is that it helps you run custom JavaScript or Python code. So you can get away with a lot of things without knowing how to code within n8n, okay? But anytime you have to write code, you'll be able to use the code node or the function node to write code for you. If you're on the cloud version of n8n, then it's even cool because then you can use AI to generate the code for you. So what you can do is you can just describe what you need to happen, and you can just use a code node to auto-generate the node for you. I think it's a good way for Vibe coders to also use a code in their n8n workflows as well. So I find that the code node is very useful when you have to do things like you need to format timestamps, you need to do computing totals, or you need to like reshape arrays. Like it makes it so seamless. You don't need to be a developer because, like I mentioned, you can even use AI within n8n to generate the code for you. So that's really neat as well. Now, the next node I want to talk about is the set node, okay? So the set node or the edit fields node. And this allows you to modify, add, or remove fields that you really don't need. So it helps you like define or clean up your fields. It's like telling n8n exactly which data you care about. Let me show you this example workflow I have in here. So I have this Black Friday deal alert workflow that is basically like taking data from Notion and then passing it into the AI agent node to do some processing in there, and then sending like data that is generated to my email subscribers in Breville. So as you can see, if I should run this workflow right now, do you see that the data that comes through from Notion is containing so many things I probably don't need? Things like the ID, submission date, start time, end time. I don't need all this information for my AI agent node. So I just need to use the edit field node to basically like extract only the important fields that I need. So when I click on execute step, I'll be able to sort of like extract all the important fields that I need as well. So that is what the edit fields nodes does. It just helps you clean up the data you get so that it's easier for you to process it later on in your automation. Now let's talk about another important node, and this node is the merge node. So this merge node is very useful, especially if you are working with multiple data sources and you want to make sure that one data source finishes running like before the next step in the entire automation continues. So as you can see with this workflow here, I have 3 streams of data coming through. So what I need is to make sure that each of these streams finish before it moves on to the OpenAI node in here. Another benefit of the merge node is that if you want to like combine the data, just think of it like the Venn diagram, right? If you want to combine data based on like matching fields, then you can use like the combine data node that would basically like merge matching items together, or you can even write like a SQL query to do the merge for you as well. And you can also decide that, okay, amongst all the data coming, I just want to choose data from one branch, okay? So the merge node is very useful for you if you are working with multiple data streams and you need to make sure that like you're getting all the data streams coming through, or you just want only one data stream to come through. Depending on the use case you're working on, you can use the merge node for that. Now, another important node I want to talk about is the if else node. And if you've been doing some coding, then for sure the if else node would not be like any new concept to you. What it does is that it helps to manage logic for you. So it's able to route items to like different branches based on the response that is set to it. So for example, if you have a workflow that should only send a Slack alert when someone selects agents in a form, then you can use the if else node to put in this logic, okay? So these are just like conditional flows that make your automation smart and not just fast as well. Similarly, you can use the switch node, and this will basically route items depending on the different fields or expressions or rules that you set within the node as well. So the switch node and the if else nodes are all conditional flows that make your automation smart and not just fast. So up until now, we've discussed the triggers, and we know that the triggers decide when something happens, and we've also discussed the action nodes, and we know that the action nodes decide what happens next. Now let's talk about data, because that's the part that trips up a lot of beginners to n8n. So let's go back into our n8n editor or canvas, and let's see how data is passed from one node to the other. I'm going to come here and I'm going to use an existing workflow I already have. Every node in n8n passes data as items. So think of an item as a single record or a row, and each item contains JSON data and a structured key value pairs. So for instance, if I should click on this, you'd see that the data is being passed here as a JSON, and it's having like a key and a value, right? If I should switch to the schema, you see the key and you see the value in there. It makes it very easy to like move data from one node to the other. So for instance, when you open the execution tab, which I'm in right now, you can see that this data from this part, for instance, in my edits fields node, I have like the deal title, right? If I want to pass the deal title from the data I just extracted from Notion, all I have to do is drag it here. Makes it so easy to access the data I need, because I don't need to like write code, or I don't need to be a developer to know that in order to reference this key in the schema, I need to like maybe know JSON and have the brackets and all that. Basically, all you can do is you can just pull data from the previous node directly into the deal title, and it makes it so easy. Also, let's say I wanted something about date and I didn't want to pull the date from this side, and then I can just use a system variable. As you can see, I have like some suggested system variables I could use. So if I just wanted the time for now, then I could just use a system variable and it'll give me the exact time that I need. So it's very easy that way, especially if you're not a developer and you're just a beginner. Just know that it's simple drag and drop. It's very easy for you to just drag data from one node to the other, and that's how data is passed through n8n. So just know that understanding JSON and how data flows between nodes is very important, because once you get this, debugging problems in your workflow becomes super easy to do. So now let's bring everything we've learned up until this point, let's bring it all together and let's build something useful. In this AI automation build, build? I'm going to build a form that would capture data and then transfer the data into Google Sheets. So let's get started. Let's come into n8n. I'm going to use the default inbuilt n8n form. Since I'm trying to capture data from an external source, this form could be a form for employees to fill out or a form for your customers to fill out. And I'm creating the form inside n8n. You could probably also embed this form onto your website. Because I'm using data collected from a form, I'm going to start with an n8n form trigger. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say n8n form and I'm going to select this. And I'm just going to say there are multiple actions and just one trigger. So the trigger here is on new n8n form event. So what I'm going to do in here is really to just fill out the form title, the description, and I'm going to add some few elements in the form. Okay, I'm going to just give it a generic title called collect user data. And I'm just going to give a description about the form. So I'll say, and then in terms of form elements, this is basically the fields you want to have in the form. So I'm just going to say first name, okay? And then just like if you are building any form, you want to give the type of that particular field. So it's a text. I'm not going to say it's a required field. And I'm just going to say address, okay? I just want to collect the address. And this is also a text. So I think this is good enough information to collect for a test, okay? And you can really decide on when to respond back, okay? So let's just keep it back as form submitted. And if like you want to add any additional options, like you want to have like a button label, you want to have like append that this is an n8n form, you can really have all that. We are just trying to build a simple automation that is just taking information from a form and then populating it into Google Sheets. So you don't need to make this complicated. Let me click on execute step and let's see what we get here. So as you can see, this form has been created for us and this is a test version. I'm just going to put my name in here, okay? Then I'm going to put an address. Okay, and I'm going to click on submit. So now that the form is submitted, if I come into my workflow here, you'd see that my name and then the address is here and we have some additional data. Okay, so let's come back in here. Now, what we really want to do is we want to populate a Google Sheet, okay? So in this case, what we're going to do is we're just going to add a Google Sheets node. So I'm going to come in here and click on Sheets and I have my Google Sheets node here. And what we want to do is we just want to append or update a role in a sheet. But I don't have the sheets created already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into Google and I'm going to create a Google Sheet just to collect data from this. And if you want to do other things with the data, maybe you want to like add an additional field and all that, this is where you can actually use the AI agent node again to do that. Okay, so I just want to create a new Google Sheet and I'm just going to call it customer details sheet, and in here I'm just gonna say name and then address. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna come back into our AI automation here. This time around, when I say append or update a row in sheet, when I click on this, you have to make sure that you connect the credentials. Again, like if you don't have the credentials set up, you need to have like a client ID and a client secret. So you have to go into the APIs and services inside Google Cloud Console and select OAuth client ID. I'm going to come in here. So now that I have my credentials set up again, I'm going to click on the plus button and then I'm going to select the Google Sheets. And in here, I'm going to click on append or update role. Make sure that you are selecting the credential that you connected. So I'm going to click on create credentials and come in here and then select your client ID if you don't have it already set up, as well as the client secret, okay? All these need to be private. You don't need to show them to anybody. So I'm going to put in my client secret. I'm going to click on save. Click on sign in with Google just to authenticate. Okay, so since I already have my credential already set up, I'm going to select the one that is active. And then under the document list, I'm going to choose the spreadsheet I just created. And then for the sheet, I'm just going to select this exact sheet. And then in terms of the column, it's asking like the columns to match on. So I'm just going to match on the first name. And then inside the name, I'm just going to drag the name here. And then for address, I'm going to drag address. So now if I should execute this step, you see that my Google Sheet has been populated. So if I come into Google here, you see that the details has been populated for me. This is like a very simple workflow and I've showed you how to really like trigger the data and how to drag it into like whatever field you need inside like a Google spreadsheet. Now, if you wanted to clean the data you receive from the form submission before sending it over to the Google Sheets node, this is exactly what you would do. You would use the edit fields node. So for instance, I can select the edit fields node, and in here, I can just give it a name. So I can say first name, and then I'll just drag the first name field in here, and then I would say address, and then I'll drag the address field name in here. The reason why you would usually want to use a set node is if you are receiving a lot of data from the previous node. In this case, we are just receiving just 4 different types of fields coming through. But sometimes if you're using something like a webhook trigger, you get a lot of noise, you get a lot of data that you're probably not interested in. So it's very useful at that point in time to just use an edit fields node. And if you decide to use an edit fields node, then it just makes it a lot more easier. All you have to do is, instead of dragging from the form submission, you are using the edit fields node. Okay, so you just have to drag data from the edit fields node. The other advantage of using the edit fields node is that if you wanted to perform additional changes to the data you receive from the form, then inside the edit fields node itself, you can put in an expression, and that would basically change and transform the data for you as well. So to recap, triggers define when your workflow starts, actions define what it does, and data handling defines how it moves information from one step to the next. You've now learned the core building block of n8n. In the next model, we'll look at connecting APIs, branching workflows, and even bringing in AI to make things a lot more dynamic. See you in the next model. So in the last model, we learned how to use triggers and actions to build automations inside n8n. Now we are taking this a step further. We are connecting outside applications, and to do this, we need a few things to be in place first. Connecting external applications to n8n is where the real magic happens, because APIs is how other tools talk to n8n. So whether you want to pull data from a CRM, or you're checking the weather, or you're sending an email, it all happens through APIs. Let's start first with authentication, because authentication is basically how n8n proves who it is when it's talking to an external system. So I'm going to come back into my n8n now, and inside n8n, you see that we have the workflow tab and we have the credential tab. I'm really interested in the credential tab right now. You see that I already have some credentials I'm already connected to, but I want to talk about 3 main types of credentials I typically see a lot when trying to connect to external tools. So I'm going to click on create credentials, and in here you can see I have auth2 APIs. You can see I have things, sometimes they're asking for just API keys, they're asking for things like access tokens. I'm going to explain what all these things mean. I want to start first with a basic authentication. So I'm going to select basic authentication here, and I'm going to click on continue. You can see that for basic auth, they're basically just asking for username and password. This is really the simplest form of authentication out there that you can get, and usually they will just ask you for username and password. I'll say that while this is simple, it's only recommended to use like basic auth when you're building internal company systems, or like you're dealing with legacy systems, because there are a lot of modern ways of doing this in such a way that your system is safe and secure. But yeah, basic auth is one of the ways in which you'll be able to like connect to external systems. So anytime you're connecting to an external application and they're just asking for a username and a password, just know that they're just using like basic authentication. Now, the other type of authentication, which I'll say is probably the most common and maybe easiest to implement, is APIs. Okay, so if I take an application like Gemini, okay, you can see that it's asking for a host and an API key. So like I mentioned earlier on, API keys are the most common. All you need is just like a single key provided by a service, and you'll be able to like authenticate to that service and communicate and have any conversations with that application. So it's just like you would have like a password for an app. You see this with a lot of other applications like Open Weather, News API, even Stripe, I think, uses API keys. And all you need to do is usually you can either just paste the API key in there, or sometimes they may say that have it in a specific format. So in that case, if you are putting in parameters, you just say like authorization, and then you'd have like bearer, and then you have your API key. It really depends on how the application is set up to receive these type of keys. For Google Gemini, for instance, we're just putting in the host URL here, and then you're just putting in the API key. But in other applications, you would have to put them in like parameters where you would say, okay, authorization, and then inside the value you'd have like bearer, and then you'd have like the API key in there. So this is another way to authenticate with other systems that are outside n8n. Now, the other way I want to also touch on is auth2. So auth2 is usually used for like big platforms, and I know that Google owns Gemini, but they have API key for Gemini. And when it comes to Gmail accounts, like if you're trying to authenticate with Gmail accounts, you have to like use the client ID and the client secrets. This is typically used for like big platforms. So think any of Google's applications like Google Drive, Gmail, Slack, Notion. Most of these platforms would use Auth2 for authentication because it's a more secure token exchange, and you log in once and the platform would give n8n a token that says yes, this user is authorized. So you can see I have my client ID, I have my client secrets in here. So if I just click on like sign in with Google, I can immediately authenticate this, and then just by doing that, like I'll be able to have access to n8n and I'll be able to use it for a duration of time. So this is definitely like a really good way to keep your application secure, and it's a secure way to basically communicate with other external systems. The good thing is that you rarely type credentials all the time manually. n8n handles the whole OAuth handshake and everything for you. So yeah, let me just wrap up here. So in short, all I just want to say is like APIs, they're just a way for you to connect with other systems, and there are different forms of authentication methods that you can use. So if you're building an application, just make sure that you're always going to check the API documentation. And when you go into the API documentation, always make sure that you're looking for the authentication or authorization section so that you know which of these methods to use. If you're not using APIs, then the application will not know whether it should give you access or not. APIs need to know who is asking, and authentication is how they verify you. So you cannot build an application communicating with an external system without using APIs. Now let's talk about the real workhorse of n8n, and this is the HTTP request node. I'm going to come back into n8n, and this time around I'm going to click on create workflow. Now I'm going to add in a manual trigger, and I'm going to attach the HTTP request node as I talk about it. So this is the HTTP request node. One thing you should know that, in my opinion, I feel like the HTTP request node is the most flexible node in n8n because it can connect to any API even if n8n doesn't have an official integration. So like I mentioned in the first two models, n8n would have custom node integrations for a lot of applications. So think of it, Notion, Stripe, Shopify. Just think of all these major applications that you use. Okay, n8n would have an official node of that. But there are some applications like Tavus here that n8n does not have a custom node integration for that. So in order to do that, you have to use like the HTTP node to be able to communicate to an application like that. So just for context, Tavus is an AI video generator tool, and it helps you generate custom avatars and all that. So I have their API documentation here, and I'm just looking at the generate video endpoint. So if you look at the connectors that are required for this application to talk to n8n, it's requesting like it has like a post. So this is a method, okay? There are several methods in which you can connect to an application, and usually the application will define that. So for instance, if you use a get, just think of a get as like something to pull information. So if you are trying to fetch data and all that, then you're going to be using a get. So you can really decide what sort of method you want to choose, and it all depends on what your use case is and what you're trying to do. Also, in terms of your method, you can use a post. Usually, just like the name implies, if you're trying to send information like you're submitting or you're sending a message from Slack, then you're going to be using post. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the fields in here. So these fields are like the endpoints, okay? And the endpoints is like basically where do I need to hit to be able to like generate the video. So looking at the API documentation, it has the URL here. So this is the endpoint URL you're going to be using. Also, it's going to be asking for things like authentication, okay? And this is going back to what we just discussed. What sort of authentication is required? Are we using like a predefined authentication type? Are we using a basic authentication? Are we using a generic one? These are all the things that you can define as well. Now, we have things like the query parameters, okay? So if I click on send query parameters, these are the things that you can see we have the headers here, right? These are parameters that are needed for your endpoints to work. So in this case, I don't have like a query parameter. So if I was trying to, let's say, get a video, okay, you'd see that there would be some query parameters, right? I need to send this as a parameter. The URL would be a query parameter so that it's able to hit the exact video that has been generated so that I can pull data from it. So basically, query parameters are there to add additional filters or additional limits to your API call. Now, let's talk about headers. Okay, if I click on send headers, basically headers would include where you'd put like your API key or your content type, right? So in here, I need to put like my API key. You can see that it's been defined in here that the header should be the API key. And then if we scroll down, we have things like the body, right? So the body is where you send your data. Okay, so if I should come back into the generate video API, I would be putting in like my background URL, my replica ID, script, and all that inside my body parameters. And then now we can talk about response handling. For response handling, depending on the type of node you're using, you'd have the option to like determine how the responses should be handled. But usually for response handling, you'd want to use something like the set node or the function node that we talked about in model 1 and 2 to help you with like cleaning up the data and also extracting specific fields that you need. So when we talk about the HTTP node, just think of it as like your Swiss Army knife. It can connect literally to anything online. If you understand how the documentations work, then it's very easy to connect them into your HTTP node in order to have that communication happen between n8n and the application. So far, we've used APIs directly in the node, but in real projects, that's not secure. I'm going to show you a secure way to do this inside n8n. So let's come back into n8n, and I'm going to close this HTTP request node because ideally we don't want to be entering our API keys and our client secrets every single time we want to call this application. So what you have to do instead is that you come back into n8n. In here, you can see there's a credentials tab. I know I've talked about the credentials tab a number of times, but basically this is how n8n stores and manages all your credentials on your behalf. So this is where you store your API keys, your tokens, and your secrets safely. And once you create your credentials here, you can basically reuse them across multiple workflows. That means that if your key changes, all you have to do is come in here and then you update it once because your credentials are encrypted at rest and they are never exposed in workflow exports. So that's definitely a good thing. So like I showed earlier on, if I should click on this right now, you can see that this Gmail account credentials has already been connected for me. So anytime I have to build an application, if I come in here and I click on create workflow and I need to have like Gmail connected, all I have to do is come into Gmail, connect it, and then I'll be able to connect it directly through this list. And I don't have to like manually come in here and enter like the credentials and all that. So it really helps make it a lot more easier for you. And it helps with managing your credentials because once you start building automations on n8n, you would have multiple automations, you connect to multiple tools, and it really is not efficient at all to always have to manually enter your API keys or enter your secrets and all that in there. This keeps your workflows really clean and it keeps your secrets safe as well. I think it's a best practice for every automation you build. So now that you know how important APIs are, let's upgrade our first AI automation by including an AI avatar that will deliver the motivational messages into our inbox. In order to do that, I'm using an application called Tavus. Now, for most applications, n8n would have an inbuilt node. If there's no inbuilt node inside n8n, then the best way to connect to those external applications is by using the HTTP request node. So I'm going to show you exactly how to connect to other applications that don't have inbuilt nodes inside n8n. So let's come back into our n8n canvas. Like I mentioned, you want to include a personalized AI avatar that will be delivering the messages into our inbox. So what we want to do here is select the plus button in between our AI agents node and our Gmail node. And what we are interested in here is the HTTP request node. Okay, I'm just going to select HTTP and then I'm going to click on HTTP request. Okay, as you can see, there are certain fields that need to be populated inside our HTTP request node. We need to populate the method, the URL, authentication. We need to send some query parameters, some headers, some body. So let me show you exactly how you can do this. We are using an application called Tavus to generate the personalized AI avatars. Okay, so the first thing to do when you get into Tavus is to really create an API key. Okay, so you need to go to platform.tavus.io/dev/API-keys. It will bring you to this page. You first need to obviously create an account if you don't have an account set up already. And then when you get into this page, what you have to do is you need to click on create new key. So once you click on create new key, you need to give your key a name. So you can say motivational API. Since I have a series of keys created already, I'm just giving it a name and then you click on create key. So once you have your key, just keep that key safe, store it somewhere because you don't need to share your key with anybody. Now, the next step is to go through the Tavus API documentation, specifically the API reference. So what we are interested in is basically the ability to generate videos, right? So when you come into the API reference, you just have to scroll down to generate video. Now, I always say that when it comes to AI automations, it's just a matter of like having the ability to connect to external applications really well. And so if you really understand how to read these API reference documentation, then you're already ahead of the curve, because like that's really what automation is about. Okay, so let's click on generate video, and under generate video, you can just really read through what this documentation says. Okay, so it's basically saying that this endpoint generates a new video using a replica and either a script or an audio file. We already have our script that has already been generated from our AI agent node. So what we really need here is just the ability to generate the video for us. Okay, and in terms of required fields, it would tell you in the documentation that the replica ID is a required field, the script is a required field, and the audio file is a required field. Let me explain what the replica ID is for a second. So you come into the Tavus platform, you see all these videos. So all these videos are what they call replicas. Okay, so you can see that they have an ID to them. So these are the replica IDs. So depending on which avatar you want to use, you can decide on what replica ID you want to use. Okay, we're just going to go with a default, which is this one. I'm going to come back into generate video, and then inside generate video, you can also see that there's a curl code here. This makes your life really easy. Okay, you don't need to figure out how do I write this code, how do I import it. It's already done here for you. So all you want to do is click on copy, and then come back into our n8n, and then inside n8n, you would see this import curl icon. Just click on that and then paste. Now, there are important things you need to note, okay? We need to first put in our API keys. Remember that we need to put in the API keys that was created initially. And then we don't want to change the background URL. We're just going to keep everything as default. In terms of the script, we are just going to be using the output from the previous step, which is the AI agent node. And then you can decide to rename the video name. Okay, I'm just going to keep it as default. Now, the next step is once you generate the video, you want to now get the video, right? So what we really want to do here is click on the plus button. Having used AI tools to generate videos, I know that there's always a wait time. Okay, so I'm going to put a wait node in between the generate video and then the next node. So I'm just going to say, let's just wait for about 2 minutes. I believe 2 minutes is enough time to generate the video. And then we're going to add an HTTP request node here. And what this HTTP request node is doing is that it's going to be getting the video from Tavus once it's been generated. So I'm going to come back again into Tavus. We're going to go into the API documentation, and we want to just copy the curl code for the get video endpoint. And inside here, I'm going to click on import curl, and then I'm going to upload. Okay. Now for the API key, you just want to use the same API key you used in the previous step. So let's copy this. And then let's just paste it in here. So this is basically going to get the video for us, right? But what we are interested in is that once the video has been generated and everything, we just want to have the ability to download a video, okay? So the output of our get video, it's going to be a series of things. So let's come back into our Tavus documentation. So it's telling us that this is the output you're going to be getting if this step is successful. You're going to be getting a video ID, you're going to get a video name, you're going to get status, you're going to get data, you're going to get script, you're also going to get a download URL. The download URL is really what you're interested in. I'm going to come in here. You can see that it's asking for a video ID, but you wouldn't be able to get a video ID without executing the previous node, okay? So let's just execute this for now, and let's just get a video ID. Once we get a video ID, we're going to drag it in here, right? The video ID has been created, and this video ID is what we need for our next step, okay? Because there's a wait node in here, it's just taking a while. But once this wait node completes, we'll be able to get a video ID. Okay, so our video ID is here. So all we're going to do is we're going to drag this video ID in here. Make sure that there are no spaces. And then what we are going to do is let's also rename this one and call it get video. Okay. So if we should run this right now, what we are expecting to see as per the documentation is to get the download URL, because the download URL is what we need in the next step. Because once it's posted in the cloud and we want to download it first and then attach it to our Gmail. Okay. So let's come back in here. And then let's execute this step. Okay. Okay, as you can see, our video has been generated for us. We have a download URL and we have the hosted URL and we also have the stream URL. So if I should copy this stream URL and I put it in my browser, you'd see the video generated for us.
Morning, today's packed with possibility. Believe in your power to create good things. Go make it happen.
Okay, so you see that this video has been generated for us. So what we are interested in is we're going to drag the download URL. The Gmail failed because obviously we didn't pass in the data correctly. We need to first download the video we got since it's hosted in the cloud. And then inside here, we're just going to drag the download URL. Okay. And then we're going to add the download URL as an attachment. We're going to get a binary file. So the binary file is what we're going to add in here as an attachment. Okay. Just want to make sure that you still have the correct data and everything. So I'm going to drag this in here. We are dragging the output from the AI agents node. We've added in additional steps. So you want to make sure that you are updating the various links so that it doesn't fail again. Okay. All right. So we have everything ready to go now. If I should execute this entire workflow, you'd see that an email will be sent to us. So I'm just going to click on execute. Okay, so as you can see, the message was sent and the video has been attached to my email. In the last node, we learned how to pull information from APIs and external tools. Now we are going to focus on what happens in between, how we clean, transform, and make decisions with that data. Because at the end of the day, in real workflows, the magic isn't just in collecting the data, it's in how you transform them and shape them into something useful. I'm going to come back into n8n. So let's start with 3 of the most powerful logic nodes I've used personally within n8n. I find these nodes to be very powerful because they are very useful in almost every workflow I have had to build. The first one is a code node, and I'll say the code node is very flexible because it allows you to sort of like run bits of JavaScript code and also Python code. And this is really dependent on like the type of programming language you are comfortable with, okay? So for instance, if I select code in JavaScript, you see that it starts off with like some JavaScript dummy code in here for me. So it really comes down to the use case you're working on. So this, for instance, this code here is basically looping over input items and adding a new field called my field to the JSON of each one of them. Maybe in your use case is probably different, but then know that if you have to even add code in your workflow at any point in time, then you can use the code node in n8n and you can decide on the mode you want it to be done for. So you can decide to run once for all items or run once for each item as well. So this is good. I mean, it's very useful, especially if you're on the cloud version, okay? You are able to include variables, methods, so you can become very sophisticated very quickly as well. Now, the other node I want to talk about is the if node. And if you've been programming in the past, then the if else logic isn't really new to you. What it does is it sort of route items to different branches based on whether they are true or they are false. So this is how the if else node looks like. And this helps a lot, especially if you have to handle a lot of conditions in your workflows. It will basically do all the conditions and the branching for you as well. So for instance, if your workflow is around like lead automation and you want to have like specific, let's say lead calls, then you can probably have in a logic and say like, if the value is this or if it's equal to this, then do that. You can add multiple conditions in here and every condition you add would add like a branch for you. It will show you a true false branch, and it also gives you the options like if you want to like convert types and all that, you can do that. There are also options to like also ignore a particular case as well. So yes, if you have to like do anything that has to do with like logic branching, then the if node code is very useful for you because you can sort of like test any value in your data using expressions inside the if else node. Now the last logic node I want to touch on is the switch node. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to select the switch node. So this is a switch node, and just similar to the if else node, if you have like multiple branches, multiple conditions, you can always use the switch node to route based on what a condition is. Okay, so if you're saying that like maybe if this is coming from A, it doesn't have to be like true or false, like you're just giving it like a branch. Okay, so the switch node is very useful if you want to sort of include like branching or do any of that sort of thing. It will just route items depending on a defined expression or defined rules you have in your workflow as well. Okay, so just to sum up, like there are a number of logic nodes inside n8n, and these are the three powerful ones I tend to use a lot: the code node, the if node, or the switch node. And you use the code node if you need to write any form of code inside your n8n workflow, and you have to use the if node if you want to have in conditions, and you use the switch node if you want to include like routings based on predefined rules. So that ends this lesson. See you in the next lesson. Once you start working with a list of items, you need to understand how to control flow. That is how to split the data, loop through it, or merge the result. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on just that. Let's come back into n8n and let me show you the nodes we have available to help you manage all this. I'm going to start first with a split in batches node. So the split out node sort of turns a list inside items into separate items. So just think of this like when your API returns, let's say 500 items at a time, you may want to process them into smaller chunks. The reason why you would want to do that is maybe the other tool that you're probably dumping the information from the API into has rate limits, and you don't want to hit that rate limit so that your workflow errors out. So in cases like this, you'd want to have your split out node, which will basically split it out into batches. So if I click here, you'd see that you're able to like split it out into batches, and it'll split this into smaller groups so that you are not hitting your rate limits. And it's very good, especially if you are doing sequential processing or you are dealing with a lot of like rate limits in your application or in your workflow. So that is what the split out node does. Now the next node I want to talk about is the merge node. Now, the merge node is also a very powerful node. And the reason why I say it's powerful is that it serves a lot of purposes, okay? It merges data of multiple streams once data from both of them is available. And I did show you in the previous lesson of how if you have multiple streams of data coming through, the merge node sort of waits for everything to come through first before proceeding to the next step. Now, another benefit is that it helps you like merge things by index. So if you are not waiting for all of them to come through, you don't want to append and you want to like combine, then you can also merge it by like index or any matching items that are available. The other thing about the merge node is that like once you get all the data streams coming through, you can also write a SQL query to do the merge on your behalf as well. And the other benefit as well is that it helps you select an output for just one branch without having to write sophisticated code by using any other node as well. So if you are like building your workflows and you realize that you'll be working with multiple data streams, then I'll encourage you to use the merge node because it makes life a lot more easier for you as well. Now, the other one I want to touch on is the loop node. And as the name suggests, like if you have to do anything that has to do with looping, like you want to make sure, like just think of it like the for each node, like for each concept in coding. If you have a lot of items and you want to loop over all these items to perform an action first before proceeding to the next step, then you want to be using the loop over items node. It helps you sort of like simulate the for each idea in coding so that each batch will run through your workflow until all the data is processed. If you have a workflow, you realize that as part of your use case, you have to like loop through a lot of data, perform certain actions first before moving on to the next stage, then you want to use the loop over items node as well. Now, there are some other nodes as well that you can use. So this is how it would look like, right? Once you bring your loop over items node into your canvas, this is how it look like. So ideally what you can do is like you can add in other actions in here. Maybe you want to fetch data from Google Drive first, process it, and then move on to like something else before finishing that step. You would use the loop over node to do that. So that sums up our session on data splitting, merging, looping over items in a list. So just think of this session as controlling how your data flows through your workflow, and you can really decide how it moves, how it repeats, and how it combines as well. In the next chapter, we're going to be focusing on error handling. So see you in the next chapter. So now let's talk about something every real automation needs: error handling. Because in production, APIs can fail, rate limits can hit, and things would break. Good automation isn't about perfection, but it's about recovery. So let me show you how you can handle errors inside n8n. Let's come back into n8n, and I'm going to walk you through the available nodes for error handling. Let's start first with the error trigger, okay? This error trigger node triggers a workflow when another workflow has an error. And I find that this is a very good way of managing errors inside your n8n instance. So this error trigger here would have an idea of every sort of workflows you have inside n8n, and would be able to trigger this workflow that you would build anytime there's an error inside any of your workflows inside n8n. So in here, you can create an additional action. Maybe when there's an error inside a workflow inside your n8n instance, it should send an alert to Slack, or it should send you an email. This lets you know that something is failing inside your n8n instance. I prefer this one because then it's not just specific and local to just that workflow, but then it's a global one. So you can have this workflow here set up, and it would make sure that anytime there's an error inside any of your workflows, it sends an alert directly to Slack. The other way to handle errors inside n8n is to use the try catch pattern. So if I come in here, for instance, and I type in error, there's the stop and throw error node here as well. Now, this will throw an error inside the workflow itself. But if you are not in the workflow there, then you don't see it. But what it does is that it throws the error inside the workflow itself, right? So you need to be around to see that there's an error. If you're not constantly monitoring n8n, you wouldn't see that there's an error, which is why I like the global trigger workflow, because then it has context about all your workflows and is able to let you know if there's an error or if there's no error as well. So this is really good. This is a simple way to just let you know inside the workflow that there's something happening and you should go check it out. So for instance, if an API fails, then it will just throw an error and say this API is failing. Now, another thing I want to talk about is when you come into every node inside n8n and you click on settings, they have the retry on fail. So every node will have this, and it helps you are able to set the maximum number of tries it should go through before it fails. You're able to set how long it's able to wait between tries. You're able to also define an action that you need to take when a node execution fails. So for instance, you can define that when a node execution fails, you want to stop the execution. So it will just stop it and fill the workflow entirely. Or you can sort of set it in such a way that it will continue the workflow, but it will pass the error message as an item in regular output. You'll see that the workflow would complete, but then it will just pass that error message in that workflow. Or you can continue using the output you get from the error. So it really depends on what the use case you are looking at is, and it really depends on what you are building your workflow for. All right, so I want you to know that if you are doing this professionally, then a professional workflow isn't the one that never fails. We are not looking at perfection, but we want to make sure that if there's a failure, we need to be aware of it. So we want a workflow that is able to fail gracefully so that we can come in and then make any changes anytime there's an error happening inside the workflow. So I know we've covered a lot inside this model. We've talked about how to use the code and the if node as well as the switch node for decision making. We've also talked about how to use the split out node, the merge node, the aggregate node, and then the loop data node. And we've talked about how to handle errors and retries inside n8n, and also how to turn raw data into a meaningful report. In the next model, we'll bring everything together, that is connecting APIs, logic, and AI, to build our first AI automation that can take action and not just react. So see you in the next model. So this model is where everything we've learned so far comes together: the APIs, the logic, and the automation itself. And now we want to talk about intelligence. So in this model, we'll explore how to integrate AI models like OpenAI, Google Gemini, DeepSeek. Think about any AI model work directly inside n8n. We'd also learn how to design structured prompts and build your first smart AI agent. So let's get started. Let's start first with how we connect these AI models. n8n makes it incredibly easy for you to just plug in any service at all. And all you need is the right node or an API call. So from our previous models, we talked about the fact that you always need to have a trigger. You're going to start with a trigger. Anytime I want to connect an AI model to my workflow, there are different ways in which I can do it. I can just come in here and then click on AI, and then I can use the AI agents node. I usually use the AI agents node. It's a lot more easier for me that way. But if you want, you can connect it directly to like OpenAI. And this is when you have an assistant already created in the backend and you want to leverage it. So for instance, if I just want to like use like the OpenAI node here instead of directly using the AI agent node, I can just click on this and I would have the ability to like message a model, analyze image, generate an image, generate audio. There are different actions that you can have in here. And this is, like I said, this is very useful if you already have an assistant that you've created on the back end side of OpenAI and you want to like call it inside your workflow. But I usually use the AI agents node here. And this AI agents node basically helps me to connect to the model as well. It allows me to also add in like my own prompts. So if you go into ChatGPT, for instance, you have the ability to enter a system prompt and a user message prompt, right? So inside n8n, it also replicates the same experience in ChatGPT. So for instance, if I come in here and I say define below, then I can enter the prompt user message. So the prompt user message is really the message how you prompt ChatGPT when you go into ChatGPT, and the chat user message is really what you type inside this box when you come into ChatGPT, like how you prompt ChatGPT. And the system message is really the instructions you give to a project in ChatGPT. So always have that in mind. Also, if you are building like a custom GPT as well, you give like a system message as well. So that's the same thing we are trying to replicate inside n8n. If you require a specific output, you can always turn this on. And what this means is that you'd have to like attach a structured output parser, meaning that if you get an output, you want it to be presenting in a particular JSON format, you want it to come out as a list, you can always have like a structured output parser attached to your model so that anytime the response comes through, it formats the data that way as well. And then this is where you connect your model. Okay, so if you want to use, let's say, Gemini, then you need to make sure that you have API keys set up. Remember, we talked about how to create API keys or the importance of having API keys in our previous model. This is where you apply it as well, right? If you want to connect to Google Gemini, you need to make sure that you go onto the Google Cloud Console and create an API key. Once your API key is connected, then you can really connect n8n to that, and then that communication is established. Now, the other thing that you need to note as well is that you can decide on which model you want to use. As the time shooting this video, we have Gemini 3.0, which has recently been released. So if that's what you're interested in, then you can also like drag this model in here as well. And then you can add like properties and stuff like that. You can have properties like the maximum number of tokens. If you want to put in any like safety settings, then you can do so as well. And then here is where you connect the memory node, right? And in terms of memory, it really depends on what you're building. I typically would, for testing and all that, I typically just use a simple memory. If you want to use all these other memory types, then you have to sign up for them, like Redis, MongoDB. You have to sign up for those type of memories. And the importance of memory is to help your AI agent or your flow remember, right? So you always need to make sure that you have like a session key. So what's important is that you have a session key so that if you have to always like reference back, there's a key in memory to identify that workflow for you. So that's great. The most popular ones I use when I'm building my own workflows are like Google Gemini. I also use, if I don't want to use Google Gemini, for instance, I also end up using OpenAI. So I can use the OpenAI chat model, and there's a similar interface as you can see with Google Gemini. You can decide to like, again, you need to have an API key. So once you have your API key connected, then you can select the model you want. The latest model now is 5.1. So if you want 5.1, then you can select that as well. Then you can, if you want to have like a built-in tool, then you can add that as well. In order to have this working for you, you always need to make sure that your agent's node has a system message, okay? Because that's what the model is there to act as a brain, right? So that's what the model would follow to respond to you. Now let's talk about something like the Hugging Face inference model. Okay, so I typically will use the Hugging Face inference API when I have like specialized tasks to run, like sentiment analysis, image captioning, or summarization. And you can use it by basically connecting an endpoint. So you first need to create a credential and you can select the model you want. It would work that way. Okay, so all these models I've showed you have one thing in common. They take a prompt as input and then they return a response. So it's very important to master how you design that prompt, and that's what makes your automation truly intelligent. So just make sure that your prompts, the system message especially, is written, you rewrite it, you test it several times. And one tip I usually give to students is instead of just having it directly in here, you can test it several times in the front end of ChatGPT to make sure that your prompt is delivering the results you want. You can test it manually first, and then you can bring it into n8n as well. Now let's talk about prompt engineering, the skill of talking to AI effectively. So just like you would prompt ChatGPT, you can also write prompts inside n8n. So I'm going to come back to the agents node we talked about in the previous lesson, and I'm going to show you the types of prompts you can have. As you can see in this AI agents node, I have a mix of static text, and then I have a bit of JSON code. And this JSON code is basically from the previous step in the process. So that is one way you can sort of write your prompts inside n8n. What this means is that anytime this workflow runs, you'd receive some input data. I haven't run this workflow so you don't see it, but you'd receive some input data, and that input data is basically what would be passed on to the next node or into this AI agent node. And the structure is very important, right? So if I scroll down here to my system message, you can see that I have a specific structure in here because the structure would always tell the AI what you want, how you want it formatted, and what to focus on. So for example, inside this AI agent node here, I first talk about the role. I give an objective, and I also, as you can see, I have another JSON code here, which is basically pulling information from the previous step. In this case, I'm just trying to pull information about the drag name. And I talk about the data sources, where to get the information from. I also talk about how to process it. And then sometimes I also talk about how to summarize the results. I give instructions about the fact that I want it to be 2 to 3 sentences long. And I've even given an example. I've also included some guardrails as well, like things that I don't want this AI agent node to do. All these things are important, right? You have to make sure that you are adding context specific or user specific context so that your model is able to process this based on your own instructions and based on your own context. Now let's talk about the other way of also providing prompts to your AI automation. So this is simply static text. So there are certain times that your AI agent node or your model does not depend on data from the previous step. And this is one example. I don't need data from the previous steps, so I don't really have any JSON code and I'm not pulling in any other data. But just notice that still you need to make sure that you're providing as much context to your system message, because if you're not specific, you don't provide enough context, then your AI automation or your AI agent isn't going to work the way it's expected to. So in short, just think about your prompt as a new programming language, and the better you write it, the smarter your workflow becomes. Now let's look at how AI and automation combine to form what we call agents. To start with, an automation executes steps you've defined. An AI agent decides what to do next based on context. And when you combine both, you get a system that can read, reason, and respond. So for example, I have this AI email agent I created here. What it does is that once a message is received, my AI agent here sort of reads the messages, categorizes them, summarizes important ones, and then it responds to the email in a timely and professional way. And I've given a clear guideline as to how it should provide the response. I've talked about the fact that it has to be professional, it has to be concise, and I've talked about the fact that it should also address any questions, emails, requests, and then maintain a friendly, professional tone. So I've defined everything I want this AI agent to do, right? So if I should, for instance, execute this right now, you'd see that I have an email that has come through. So this email is passed on to my AI agent, and based on the response I get from the AI agent, it sort of like generates an output for you. Okay, so when I come in here into my next step in the automation, I've given clear instructions that I just want to have a human in the loop. Okay, so this passes this on to the next step in the process, which is the Gmail node. If I should execute this node right now, it'll send me a message that this is the response that has been drafted. Do you want to approve? And once this is approved, the response is sent to whoever sends the email to me. So that's not just automation. We do have AI in here making some decisions, helping out with crafting emails, making decisions on whether this is even worth responding to. And you can even upgrade your workflows. Like if you wanted to just respond to, let's say, urgent emails only, you can put all that inside a prompt inside your AI agent node, and it would act with purpose. So just think about it like this: agents are where your workflows start to feel alive. They don't just follow instructions, but then they make decisions on your behalf. So in this model, we've learned how to connect AI models like OpenAI, Gemini, Hugging Face. We've also learned how to engineer effective prompts directly inside n8n. We've learned how to combine automation plus AI to build autonomous agents. And we've also learned how to create a practical AI assistant that actually saves time. This is where n8n stops being just an automation tool and it starts becoming your AI workspace. You are no longer just automating, you're augmenting intelligence. So an AI agent is more than just a prompt. It has state, it has memory, and it has autonomy. So what do I mean by state? So state is what the agent knows right now. That is the context, the task, variables, and inputs. And memory is what the agent stores long term. That's the database, vector store, sheets, and then Notion, and any other apps you use to store data. And autonomy is really the ability for the agent to decide the next step and not just respond with one prompt. And a good thing is that n8n gives you autonomy by flows, conditions, loops, webhooks, and tool executions. Modern AI agents will combine all this. They'll combine LLMs, tools, workflow logic, and memory. So after completing this model, you'll be able to explain what makes an AI agent and also identify the state, the memory, and autonomy inside an n8n workflow. When you're designing an AI agent, there are things you need to consider. One of them is the goal. What is the exact outcome you expect the agent to produce? You also need to consider things like the input. Are you going to be taking voice input, text input, email, or form input? Consider things like the tools you're using. Are you connecting APIs, Google Sheets, 11 Labs, Utel AI, Gmail? Also think about the workflow logic itself, right? So what conditions are you introducing? Are you including branching? Think about memory. Does the agent store conversation history? Does it store results? What are the summaries looking like? You also need to consider safety. So guardrails, validation. Are you filtering abusive input? You also need to consider the output format, right? Are you outputting data in the form of a text, email, audio? And are you also including a human in the loop? When does the agent have to escalate to a human? All these are things you need to consider upfront when you're building an AI agent. You don't just start building before considering this. You need to have a whole plan before you start going into your automation and before you start building it. Up until this point, we've been focused on building. That is creating triggers, connecting APIs, integrating AI, and automating tasks. But when your workflows grow in complexity with multiple branches, integrations, and users, you need to plan to scale them sustainably. Okay, so in this session, we'll cover how to structure your workflows, manage complexity, and handle errors, and also keep things secure, making sure that everything performs smoothly, even under heavy load. Let's start first with structure. When your workflow is small, like I have in here, you can keep it all in one canvas. But as your workflow grows and it becomes really complex, like what I have in here, you quickly realize that you need patterns to keep it readable, testable, and easy to handle. So the first thing I want to talk about is naming conventions. So you want to make sure that you have clear naming conventions. So you need to make sure that you rename every node descriptively. Instead of just having the generic name as HTTP request, just make sure that you are naming it something custom like generate music, get music details, because your future self will thank you. Because next time when you come in here and you want to understand what this workflow does, because you've sort of named each of the nodes well, it will make it so easy for you to pick this workflow up and understand. Also, another important thing is to group related nodes visually. And I use a lot of like annotations and colors and comments to do this. So what I do usually is to use the sticky notes here. And what it does is that I'll be able to like give like a title. You can even go as deep as like putting in like descriptions and everything, so that again, when you pick up this workflow next time, you have an idea of what all these nodes that are sort of grouped here together do. Now, the other thing I do is you need to follow left to right flow. Okay, so make sure that you keep your triggers on the far left side, keep your major actions in the middle, and then the outputs to the right. So these are like the outputs that I have here. This helps other people instantly understand your workflow structure. It helps your team. If you have someone new joining your team and you want them them to like basically go through all your templates in n8n. Having this particular flow makes it very easy for them to also understand. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is modular thinking. Okay, so when you notice like a repetitive logic, like if you're always constantly sending Slack alerts, you're always sending emails, reports, and all that, that's a sign that you need to extract it into a sub workflow. So what you can do is you can make this a sub workflow, and then next time, instead of you having to like repeat that repetitive task, you can always call like the sub workflow, and then you'll be good to go. The last thing I want to touch on is modular thinking. So when you notice that you're repeating the same logic over and over again, like you're always sending things to Slack, you're always sending emails, just extract that portion and then put it into a sub workflow. Because when you do that, you don't have to always repeat the same node patterns. All you'd have to do is you just have to call the sub workflow, and then you should be good to go. So if you are someone who has been coding for a while, then just think of workflows like code. You need clarity, you need consistency as much as the functionality. And if you haven't written any line of code before and this is your first time venturing into n8n, then just know that, again, if it's clean, then it's easier for you. If you have clarity, if you have notes and everything, then know that it makes it a lot more easier to understand your own workflows, your own form of automations as well. So think of workflows like code. Clarity, consistency matter as much as functionality. Make sure you are always incorporating all these best practices. Your future self will thank you. From our previous lesson, we learned that one of the most powerful scaling features in n8n is the use of sub-workflows, workflows that can be called from other workflows. This is a similar concept to creating reusable functions in programming, meaning that you can define a workflow once, for example, and then call it from anywhere. So from the workflow you see here in my canvas, this workflow basically sends a message to Slack. So if you realize that within most of your templates or within your workflows, you realize that you're always sending messages to Slack, what you can do is you can just separate them into a separate workflow like I have in here and just mark it as a workflow that can be executed from another workflow. In order to do that, you just have to use the trigger for the sub workflow, right? So this will be the trigger so that when it's executed from another workflow, it basically triggers the entire step-by-step automation in here, which is in this case just sending a message to Slack. The benefits of doing this is that you don't need to update the logic every time in multiple places that you have this workflow in. All you have to do is, if you want to change the logic, like send it to Slack and update Asana or something like that, you can just come in here, update the logic once, and then it would be updated in all the other areas. Now, once you have your sub workflow defined, if you want to use it in your automation, all you have to do is you come into the automation that you want to use it in, click the plus button, and then you search for sub workflow, and then you select execute a sub workflow, and then inside a workflow list you can really select the workflow you want to use. So in this case I want to use Slack messages, so this is what I'm gonna do. And then you can select the mode, whether you want to run for all items or for each items, and then you can add in some options as well in here. So this is really a clean way and an easy way for you so that you don't have to be repeating the same steps in multiple automations. Using sub workflows turn n8n from a single use automation tool into a modular automation platform, and I find it's very good, especially if you want to scale and scale fast as well. So now let's move on to the next lesson. When you start scaling automations across teams or clients, errors become inevitable. So you need visibility. And I know we've covered some key error handling techniques in the previous lessons, but just to recap, the first one you need is you can use the global error workflow, which is basically setting up a dedicated workflow triggered by the error trigger node. What this will do is that it will catch failures from all other workflows for you. And then you can send these failures to yourself in Slack, or you can send email alerts with details like the workflow names, the error message, and then the timestamp. Now you can also introduce custom login, which would typically include like a function node to log key steps like API responses or success messages to a Google Sheets, database, or log file. And in there you can track fields like the workflow name, execution ID, and then the duration. Now the other way to handle errors is also through error branching. Okay, so you can use error branches. So especially in critical workflows, you can use if else nodes, or you can continue on fail plus Slack notifications so that one bad step doesn't stop everything. At the end of the day, visibility is what matters, okay? Visibility is what separates hobby automations from production-ready systems. And the way you handle your errors will show how well you can scale your automation and how well you can scale your business as well. So when you're building AI automations, know that security isn't just about protecting data, it's about building trust in your automation. So one of the important ways to ensure that your automation is secure is by storing secrets safely. Always use a credential tab, and I talked about it in n8n to store like your API keys, tokens, or your password. Also, never hard code secrets in nodes or expressions, because then it's very easy for people to just copy the passwords and all that. And if you're self-hosting, use environment variables and limit access to that file so that you can store this on a server. Also, ensure safe API usage. So just make sure that you validate and sanitize incoming data, especially from webhooks. You can also use if conditions or function nodes to check for missing or suspicious values before running actions. Another important thing to take note is rate limit. Okay, so rate limit external calls if your workflows handle user generated inputs. Another thing to consider is access control. So for teams, ensure that only trusted users can modify or run your workflows. And you can also use like role-based access where possible. At the end of the day, security by design means that you never have to worry about what happens when your workflow scales, because if you already have security baked in, then you know that your workflows are safe and you can sell this to a lot of potential customers, and you can even add this as a competitive advantage to your business. As your workflows grow, performance starts to matter, and you don't want long chains of slow nodes blocking everything. So in this lesson, I'm going to cover key practices you can adopt as you scale. The first one is parallelization. So you can use the split in batches node plus the execute workflow pattern to process items in chunks. And you can also run multiple branches simultaneously to speed up processing. The other thing you can adopt is queues and background jobs. So for very high volume workflows, consider queuing incoming requests via tools like RabbitMQ, Kafka, or n8n's built-in queue mode. Can also reduce the node count as well. So you can combine logic where possible. So for example, you can use the function node to handle multiple calculations in one place instead of using 5 set nodes. Okay, you can rather use that node to do all the logic for you, and it would run the code on your behalf as well. And another thing you can consider doing is also monitor executions. So check the execution logs regularly to spot slow nodes or timeouts. As you scale, performance becomes very important, and it's not something that you have to take lightly, because performance isn't about making everything run instantly. It's more about making it run predictably and efficiently. And if you are promising your clients that you're going to help them save time, then you need to make sure that performance is also something you don't just push under the carpet. And if your workflow is not performing really well and is too slow, then your customers will not be happy with you. So we've spent the last few models learning how to build workflows, connect APIs, integrate AI, and scale our systems. Now it's time to talk about something equally important, that is getting paid for it. Because the truth is that n8n skills are in high demand right now, because businesses want automation, but few people know how to deliver it really well. And that's where the opportunity lies. So let's talk about it. The first way to make money from n8n is through freelancing. So let's talk about it. In my opinion, given what I know, the fastest way to make money through building n8n automations is freelancing and consulting. So let me break it down for you. So if you go to a platform like Upwork, Fiverr, Contra, all you have to do is search for Zapier, Make, or automation projects, and you would find clients asking for exactly what n8n can do, but cheaper and more flexible. Because in a previous lesson, I had talked about the differences between these tools, and some of the services you can provide include CRM automations, syncing leads between forms, CRMs and email tools, AI content pipeline, automating social media, e-commerce workflow, order notification. Just think about it. Any process that can be automated in a business, this can be done. And niche down. Don't just sell automations, sell the outcomes. And you can choose specific industries. And you can say things like, I help coaches automate onboarding, or I help Shopify sellers save 5 hours a week. So to be honest, in my opinion, freelancing is the gateway, because it helps you test what people are willing to pay for, which industries you should focus on, which sort of automations you should focus on. And then based on that, you can build your portfolio around that. The other way in which you can make money from building AI automations is by starting an AI agency, because once you've built some few workflows and you have some happy clients, you can definitely transition into the AI agency model, because at this point, you are no longer selling hours, you are selling systems. And in this model, you can build done for you automation packages for small businesses, and you can charge retainers for ongoing maintenance as well. An example example can be that you can offer a complete automation setup for a business. That is like the lead capture system, CRM, Slack alerts, email follow-ups. And you can sell this one as a one-time build plus a monthly support retainer. And one packaging tip I want to give you is the fact that it's very important for you to group your workflows by industry. So like real estate automations, e-commerce workflows, or AI content bundles, because clients, they love templates and they can visualize. So show them things like dashboards or results as well, and not just diagram. So I'd say that the agency model, it definitely gives you some predictable income. It gives repeatable systems and the ability to scale with a small team. And once you have a hang of the AI agency model, you realize that you'd have like a constant stream of income coming through, because now you're not just focusing on just one workflow, but you're focusing on an entire system for a business or for a large enterprise. Another income stream I want to talk about is having an n8n template marketplace, okay, or what I'll call digital products. So you can actually sell your n8n workflows. If you didn't know that, I do sell mine as well. And although it doesn't bring a lot of money, it's a good stream of passive income because there's a growing demand for ready-made automation templates. People want plug and play workflows they can import, they can customize and use. And you can sell them on Gumroad, you can sell them on Ko-fi, Etsy, or on your own site. So for instance, you can have an AI newsletter writer that would basically use ChatGPT, Notion, and Gmail. You can have a WhatsApp bot for coaches that can use like Twilio, Google Sites, Calendly. You can even have a CRM sync workflow that will use HubSpot, Airtable. And you can basically package them as starter kit, and then you can include a tutorial video, the JSON file, and then the setup guide. You can even have like a bonus, like you can bundle multiple templates into a mini course or a membership. Selling templates definitely does turn the experience you've learned building n8n automation into an asset, because then you can start earning money while you sleep. Like I mentioned, you may not sell these for, let's say, 200 bags, but you can sell them for $10, and this is something that you can just do once, and then it will just generate income for you on the side as well. Now, if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, learning n8n automations can really skyrocket your career growth as well. So if you don't want to be an entrepreneur or you don't want to quit your job, you can still make money with automation. In fact, one of the most powerful ways to monetize these skills is inside your own current company. Because like I mentioned, a lot of companies are in need for these skills. And once you position yourself in your organization as a go-to person who is great at AI automation, and you can position yourself that you can help your organization save time and money, definitely this is something that will put a lot of eyeballs on you, and you can now become the automation person, the go-to expert who streamlines operations within your organization. So for example, you can start by automating reporting, ticket triage, onboarding tasks, or data syncs between tools, and you can present your impact as time saved, that is hours per week, and then you can provide the dollar value as well. When you can show how your automation saved the company thousands of dollars, you are not just an employee now, you are a return on investment generator, and that's how you can earn promotions, raises, and influence within your company and also within your organization as well. Another passive income stream I want to talk about, in addition to having the template marketplace, is building a passive stream through content creation, or just leveraging your creativity to build something passive that would bring income to you. So for example, if you have a YouTube account or you have a TikTok account, you can create TikTok automations, like you can create videos and automate them on TikTok. That is basically have an agent that will generate like the clips, summaries, all using AI tools. Or you can have like a lead generation funnel that can basically capture emails and personalized follow-ups, feed data into your CRM automatically. Or you can even have like a finance agent that will track stock portfolio or rental income with automated dashboards and alerts. When you combine n8n with your creativity, you can definitely build more automations that will keep earning in the background. And this is real digital leverage at its finest. So now this is my challenge to you. I want this to become real for you. So I want you to design your own monetization plan using the same approach I use for my clients. So I want you to go through the step-by-step activity. So just choose your niche, okay? Ask yourself, who can I help right now? Coaches, marketers, real estate agents, or e-commerce owners. Then the next thing is pick 1 to 2 workflows to productize, okay? So think about workflows you've already built, like client onboardings, AI summaries, social media content automation. Those are potential services or templates you can monetize. And then now, once you have that ready, define your offer. Okay, how will you position it? Is it going to be a down for you setup? Is it going to be a template or a monthly maintenance package? You need to decide all these upfront. You also need to decide on your pricing model. Pricing models typically they are hourly for freelancers, retainers for agency, one time for templates. And then finally outline your neck in the next 30 days what you're gonna do. Pick one thing to launch. That is your first Upwork gig, a Gumroad template, or a LinkedIn post announcing your offer. The truth is that the fastest way to earning income is to take what you already know and then packaging it into something valuable and repeatable. Okay, so let's wrap up. You now have 5 clear paths to monetize your n8n skills. I've talked about freelancing and consulting. I've talked about building an AI automation agency. I've also talked about selling workflow templates, leveraging automation for career growth, creating passive income automations. And I also capped it off with a personal monetization plan you can start implementing today. Now, I want you to know that the world is automating fast, but most people don't know how. Since you developed the skill now from watching this course, it means that you're not just building workflows, you are building wealth. I know that it does take time, but if you stay consistent and you practice everything that has been taught in this course, you'll be able to gain some passive income or even active income just by building, practicing, and selling to clients.